A crisis reveals what is inside of us. Sometimes I hear people say, well, they were made in a crisis. Crises don't make us. Crisis reveal us.
Hi, I'm Chris Cody. I don't know about you, but I know that I love to absorb content. There's so much free content out there. However, one challenge that I do have is that I often struggle to then take that content and put it into practice. I don't change the habits that I need to based off of the video that I've been inspired by. If that's you, I want you to watch this video, and then I would love for you to comment, and we would love to hear your thoughts below.
You see, a crisis exaggerates the negative, and good leaders deal with as much of the negative before it happens as they possibly can. Quick story. When I wrote the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, we went on a tour for 1 week using a private jet, 3 cities every day, started on the East Coast, 21 cities in 1 week. Breakfast at one location, lunch at another, dinner at another, talking about the book. By the time we were out in Dallas, the book was already a bestseller on the list. And we were all excited because we'd put a heavy weekend. We're coming back in, and we were flying into Atlanta. And about 50 feet from the ground, we hit a wind shear. And literally that private plane of ours just immediately dropped and hit the runway, just like that. And immediately we were all frightened because that we didn't land, we dropped. There's a difference between landing and dropping. And what's interesting is as soon as that wheel and that drop hit that runway, the pilot took the plane right back up in the air. I mean, immediately. I mean, so quick that any fear that we had was kind of like, oh, wow, whew, we're still in the air. Circled, came back in, landed the plane. We got off the plane, and I went over and kissed the ground, congratulated the pilot, and I said, it was amazing that you could make a decision that fast. I mean, those wheels hit that runway, and you were back in it. It's amazing that kind of a decision that you could make. And so I'm talking to him about it. And he looks at me and he said, look, John, he said, you don't understand. And I said, what don't I understand? He said, what you don't understand is I made that decision 20 years ago. He said, as a pilot, I've gone through everything I can possibly think of that can be a problem. And I always said, what will I do in that situation? And I have a game plan for every problem. And he said, my game plan was if I land off balance or I don't land well, get back up in the air, because he said the air has a lot more room for mistakes than the ground does. And he was right on that. Well, what am I saying about it? Great leaders, they think things through on the front end. And when the sea is not smooth, remember this, no sailor ever distinguished himself on a smooth sea. The distinguishing part is what you do during the rough times. We're really growing and things are going well, but he said, I'll have to admit, emotionally, I'm a little bit hard on myself right now. I'm not as happy as I thought I would be. He said, as I'm looking at this, I should be happier. I should be more excited. Now, he said, I'm happy. I'm excited. But he said, I just don't have the degree that I kind of thought I would have at this point. And he said, can you help me walk through that? And so I called him by name, and I shared with him, I said, I think I understand where you are. And I said, where you are is this. For 18 months, you have been leading people uphill. You've all heard me talk about everything worthwhile is uphill, so I don't need to talk about that anymore. But the only difference between average leadership, which is always uphill, and COVID leadership is that it's just a steeper hill. And I said to him, you have been leading for 18 months uphill, bringing people along, encouraging, lifting, doing everything you could to help everybody finish the race, be successful, do better in their business, do better in their own personal life, family life. I said, you've been pulling people, pushing people, encouraging people, lifting people. And I said, I think what the challenge is you emotionally are just low on fuel. I said, what you know mentally and what you feel emotionally aren't the same. What you know mentally is this is a great accomplishment, what you're doing. But what you feel emotionally doesn't match that. And it said it's going to take some time for you to refuel and build up your emotional tank again. And I want you to know that. And he was so grateful. We had a pretty good conversation about that. He said, John, I think you just helped me. Well, I'm coming from that mentoring conversation to our mentoring time together. And really, Aaron is the one who put this lesson before me and really developed a lot of it for me. And so we had some time together and we talked it through and we built the lesson for you. And I thought, how appropriate timing-wise to come out of one mentoring session of a very successful leader who just is emotionally a little bit tired and isn't maybe celebrating to the level that he thinks that he should. And now me talking to you. And why am I talking to you about an abundance mindset? Because I think over the last 18 months, the prominent emotion in most people's life has been fear. And so as a leader, you're having to lead people through this wilderness of uncertainty and fear and what's going to happen and what's happening to me. A lot of questions. And I think you have been pulling well, leading well. You've had to work harder to get where you are. Booker T. Washington said, success is not where you have arrived. He said, success is what you had to go through to get where you are. And it's the going through to get where you are that sometimes just kind of wears us out a little bit. I was doing a lesson the other day for another company, and it was entitled How to Overcome Hard Times. And my opening statement to them is what I wanted to share with you right now. I said, if you want to overcome hard times, you have to go through hard times. Don't miss this. There's no such thing as vicariously leading others how to go through difficult times without going through them yourself. There's a tendency to think that it's never been this bad before. We're the only ones that have ever experienced this. And it's very possible for us to kind of over-exaggerate our place in history and the crisis that we're within in its place in history also. Now, I'm going to get back to that in a moment. I often teach, you've heard me teach, that there are no two good consecutive days in a leader's life. I just think that's true. I think leaders deal with too many issues, problems, that there's just never two easy days, problem-free days in any leader's life. But a crisis means that there's more than two bad days in a leader's life. There's a whole bunch of bad days in a leader's life, and they just keep coming, and they sometimes even pile on. But let's think about it for a moment. Crisis is very common. Well, let me just take you back in the last 20 years. In the year 2000, do you remember Y2K? Oh, I remember. Oh my. Everything was going to go bad when we turned to the year 2000, and people were, saving food up and, just doing, to be honest with you, doing all kind of crazy things. Back in 2000, we said, Y2K it's going to kill us all. We're all going to be in deep weeds. I can remember as a leader in Y2K very clearly telling people that they were wrong, that it wasn't going to be that bad. In fact, I was in Jacksonville speaking to 2,500 leaders, and we were in a Q&A, and I had one of the leaders stand and say, John, what are you doing to prepare for Y2K? And I said, the only thing I'm doing to prepare people for Y2K, or myself, is to tell people it's not going to be like they think it's going to be. And he looked at me and said, well, what happens if you're wrong? Well, I said, then I'll come and live with you. You seem to have your act together. Now, let me just explain something to you. Back at Y2K, a whole bunch of people said the sky is falling. 2001, anthrax. Oh, it's going to kill us. Be careful not to open that envelope. 2002, the West Nile virus. Oh, that virus, it's going to get us. SARS was in 2003. How about the bird flu back in 2005? E. coli. Wow. 2006. Oh, my. The bad economy in 2008. It's the end. It's never been so bad. 2009, it was the swine flu. How about BP oil back in 2010? Okay, we're in trouble there. And then remember the Mayan calendar is talking about the end times? That was in 2012. How about 2013 when North Korea is going to kill us all? The Ebola virus was back in 2014. We had the Disney measles in 2015. And if it wasn't the Disney measles, it was going to be ISIS. I remember being in some very serious conversations about ISIS and this incredible terrorist crisis that we had. 2016, it was the Zika virus, and now 2020, it's the coronavirus.
Hey, my friend. Hey, leader. One of the most significant decisions of my life was deciding to invest in my leadership. Believe it or not, there was a time that I wasn't the leader I could have been. In fact, you could say that I was broke, personally, professionally, relationally, financially. I had no idea then what difference becoming a better leader would make for me in every single area of my life, my personal life, my professional life, my financial life, my relationships. And not just the difference it made in me, but to those around me. Now I sit here today as the CEO of Maxwell Leadership. My proximity to John C. Maxwell has afforded me many benefits, not the least of which is the understanding that truly everything rises and falls on leadership. The first person you have to learn to lead is yourself. Right now, there are over 50,000 individuals worldwide who are able to lead, to coach, to train, and speak, and use the name of John Maxwell to promote their business. These are people who are making a difference in the lives of others while improving their own life, their own career, and their bank account. If you want to know more about how to do this, click the link in the description. On the other side of that decision could be your breakthrough, as well as your breakthrough for countless others you'll have the opportunity to influence.
A crisis reveals what is inside of us. You see, sometimes I hear people say, well, they were made in a crisis. Crises don't make us. Crises reveal us. When a crisis comes, whatever is on the inside is what will come out. When you squeeze an orange, guess what you get? Orange juice. When you squeeze a lemon, guess what you get? You get lemon juice. When a human being gets squeezed, what's inside, positive or negative, will come out. You see, choices make us, crises reveal us. And I want us to really understand this because we have control over our choices. We don't have control over our conditions. And if you're in a leadership role, I just want you to know you can't moan and lead at the same time. So figure it out. If you're going to lead, you and I have to be able to give people hope, and moaning doesn't give people hope. I don't know, perhaps you heard this kind of amusing about the woman who whined and basically she said, the whole world is against me. And, her friend came up and said, I got good news for you. The whole world isn't against you. And she kind of looked at her like surprised. She said, the whole world doesn't know you. Just, can you relax? I had an interesting conversation 3 years ago with a man named John Hope Bryant. Once in a while, I hope you have conversation with people that when you finish that conversation, you walk away and you just say, I'm going to be a better person because of that. Now, John Hope Bryant wrote a book called Love Leadership. So I'm going to read from him like I did C.S. Lewis a moment ago for perspective. Now listen and just hang with me here for a moment. Most people find strength in things that are outside of them. Now that's a problem. If I find my strength from things that are outside of me, I'm going to have a problem. And then he goes on to say money, power, titles, wardrobes, cars. But most of the things that make a leader are on the inside. Integrity, wisdom, confidence, vulnerability, joy, passion, compassion, intuitions. These things come from life experience, from life's trials, from the deepest part of a person's soul. You can't fake them, and you can't buy them because they're not for sale. He goes on. My mentor, Reverend Murray, says, Life asks a question of every leader that gauges their effectiveness and wisdom. The question? What have you been through? Following battle, King Arthur would have his knights line up before him and ask each one of them, "Show me your scars." And if none existed, he would say to the warrior, "Leave me and go get your scars." I've learned that authenticity counts, and that the best route to an authentic life is through your scars. As you earn them, you learn to drop the BS in your life, and you attach yourself to the substance in your life and to the substance in those around you. Precisely because of that history of loss, because we've had loss. Now catch this. Because of the history of loss, you never take yourself too seriously or get needlessly seduced by short-term materialism. In other words, loss helps to ground and mature a person. There's a hard lesson in life setbacks. Just as steel is forged through fire, leaders are forged through loss. There can be no strength, no real inner growth without the pain of legitimate suffering. It's a scientific fact. You cannot have a rainbow without a storm. Loss is wisdom acquired early. Here's what Stephen said. Most people are deeply scripted in what I call a scarcity mentality. They see life as having only so much, as though there were only one pie out there. And if somebody were to get a piece of that pie, it would mean less for somebody else. The scarcity mentality is a zero-sum paradigm of life. People with scarcity mentality have a very difficult time sharing recognition and credit, power, or profit, even with those who help in the production. They also have a hard time being genuinely happy for the success of other people. Then Stephen Covey says, now let me contrast that to the abundance mentality. The abundance mentality flows out of a deep inner sense of personal worth and security. It is the paradigm that there is plenty out there and enough to spare for everybody. It results in the sharing of prestige, recognition, profits, and decision-making. It opens possibilities, options, alternatives, and creativity. Now, Stephen did a great job just giving us the scarcity mindset and the abundance mindset. I think probably you already had that, but I wanted to read from that classic book and again encourage you, if you don't have it, to purchase it. So let me now break it down for you. There are three very simple statements. They all kind of just go together. Just let me give them to you. Then we're going to build off of them. We're going to do some teaching. The first statement is that I see what I'm prepared to see. I don't see everything, and you don't see everything either. We don't see what is. We see what we're prepared to see. That's why two people can be in the same meeting and see totally different things. That's why a person can even go into a room and see, my gosh, I remember one time Margaret was at a conference with me, and so we were having lunch after the morning session, and she said, you know, John, when the guy came up to you with the blue coat, well, you were in a conversation with him for a while. What did he ask? And I said, Margaret, I don't remember somebody talking to me in a blue coat. Oh, no. I mean, he was with you. You probably were there together for 4 or 5 minutes. He had a blue coat on, and he was like a foot away from you. I mean, you're talking. The guy in the blue coat, I'm just curious, what was the conversation about? Well, Margaret, I don't remember seeing a guy in a blue coat. Now, was a guy in a blue coat in front of me? Of course. He's 3 feet away from me. Did I see the blue coat? No. Why? Margaret is into colors and decoration. She's an artist. She can tell you what everybody is wearing and what colors they all have. I can tell you none of that. I don't. That isn't even where I am. I'm watching facial expressions, and I'm watching the lean in. I'm watching posture and everything. So now here's what I want you to understand is that this is huge. I see what I'm prepared to see. Now this is important because if I'm prepared to see scarcity, I will constantly see that there's not enough. If I'm prepared to see abundance, I will constantly see that there's more enough. Now let me give you the second statement. The second statement is, what I see becomes reality to me. It's real. And so when somebody comes up to me and they have a scarcity mindset and they say, you know what, I think I don't think we're going to be able to make it. I look at them and I say, I think you're probably right. You won't be able to make it. So as leaders, you've gone through them, but now you're trying to bring your people through them at the same time. And what I want to do is I want to really focus now. Remember, what we focus on expands. So for these next few minutes, focus with me on abundance. If you and I are walking down a street and we're just breathing, okay, we're just walking, talking, we're breathing. Not one time do you look at me and say, John, do you think there's enough air to breathe? Not one time do I look at you and say, wow, measure your breaths because, gosh, we could run out of air. No. It never enters our mind because we have grown up in an environment of abundance, that there's plenty of air for all of us. But let's just say, for example, we're scuba diving. And in the scuba diving, all of a sudden, maybe one of the tanks malfunctions, and instead of having two tanks, we got to have one tank to get back up to the surface. And now all of a sudden, we're being very careful, and we are measuring our breaths, and we are asking each other, do we have enough air in that tank? Now, what I've just described is a scarcity mindset. And let me just say this. During adversity, it's okay for a brief time to go into scarcity. And the reason it's okay is because just as the scuba diving illustration is, we understand we got a problem. We only have one tank of air. We've got to get back to the surface. So now we have to measure our breaths. Now we are asking the question, is there enough air? And what I want you to know is during difficulties, during surprises, there's a tendency for us all to say, oh, what do I have? How much do I have? Again, the best way I can illustrate that is that, when COVID hit, probably the first 2 months, Mark and I continually discussed the issue of how do we make payroll and how do we keep people on board and what adjustments do we have to make? And Mark, as a good leader, began cutting and pulling back. We did that so we could take care of our people because our people were first. But I mean, he had to make all kind of adjustments and he literally operated with there may not be enough money to go around. There may be issues we don't know about. And he took a scarcity mindset. Now, here's what I want you to catch. It's okay to have a scarcity mindset in an emergency. It's not okay when the emergency is over to stay in that type of thinking. That's what I don't want you to miss. And so many times, I think, we allow what happened behind us or the experiences that we've had to begin to cause us to lead differently instead of leading abundantly. Again, we go back to the illustration I've given you before. Am I a river or am I a reservoir? A reservoir has a scarcity mindset. Hold the water. You may need it for not a rainy day. And the river is just flowing and giving and depositing water wherever it can or wherever it should.
If you're like me, you watch a video like that from Maxwell Leadership and you just get inspired. I love how it's so practical. It just makes a lot of sense. But here's the challenge. We have to commit to each other. We have to commit to change, both in our personal lives and also our professional lives. Looking for more information about the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team? Follow the link below to learn more. We can't wait to hear from you and add value to your lives.